Sometimes, the scariest stories aren't about monsters or ghosts. They're about people, real people, who experienced something they still can't explain. Tonight, you'll hear 3 true horror stories sent in by viewers who say these moments changed their lives forever. From a man who inherited a painting that screamed at night, to a teenage girl stalked by someone who always knew where she was, and a family whose baby monitor caught something that shouldn't have been in the room. These are not urban legends. These are real stories, told by the people who live them. So turn off the lights, and don't answer your phone, because these are 3 true horror stories you'll never forget. Sean Robinson wasn't the kind of person who believed in the supernatural. He was 38, a construction foreman living a quiet life in northern England with his wife, Anna, and their young son, Jacob. They'd moved into his late grandmother's old cottage a few months after her passing, an aging brick home at the edge of a misty forest in Cumbria. It was peaceful, until the day Sean went into the attic. He wasn't looking for anything special, just old boxes to clear out for renovation. That's when he found it, a large wooden frame wrapped in faded bedsheets, leaning against the wall. When he uncovered it, the dust came off like smoke, and behind it, a painting. It showed the figure of a man sitting in darkness, clutching his face in both hands as if in pain. The background was pitch black, and only his pale arms caught the light, smeared with thick, almost red-tinted paint. The brush strokes looked frantic, desperate. At the bottom corner was a name Sean didn't recognize: the Anguished Man. He didn't think much of it until his mother called later that evening. When he mentioned finding a painting in the attic, she went silent. Then she told him what she'd heard from his grandmother years ago, that the artist who created the Anguished Man had used his own blood in the paint, and taken his life shortly after finishing it. Sean laughed it off at first. It sounded like one of those family ghost stories told to scare kids from touching heirlooms. But something about it stayed in his mind, especially when he remembered that his grandmother kept that painting locked away for decades. He decided to hang it in the guest room anyway. That night, Sean woke up to a sound he couldn't place. A soft sobbing, faint but close, like a woman crying behind a closed door. He checked Jacob's room. He checked the hallway. Nothing. When he stepped into the guest room, the sound stopped. The air was cold enough to see his breath. The painting, which had been perfectly centered earlier, was slightly crooked. He fixed it, shrugged, and went back to bed. But as he turned off the light, he swore he heard the faintest whisper from down the hall. A man's voice, hoarse and trembling. "Help me." Over the next few days, strange things started happening around the house. Doors that had been closed were suddenly open. Footsteps echoed upstairs even when Sean was alone. Anna complained of headaches whenever she entered the guest room, and Jacob began having nightmares. One night, Sean found his son standing at the top of the stairs at 2 a.m., crying. When he asked what was wrong, Jacob said, "The man without eyes is in the room, Daddy." That's when Sean's stomach dropped. He hadn't shown Jacob the painting. He ran to the guest room. The painting was still hanging, but this time it was face down on the floor, the hook pulled out of the wall. Behind it, the wallpaper was damp, like something had been pressed there for hours. He touched it. It felt warm. Anna begged him to get rid of it, but Sean wanted proof. He set up an old camcorder in the room before going to bed. The next morning, he reviewed the footage. At exactly 3:12 a.m., there was a faint sound, like someone breathing. Then, the frame of the painting moved. Not much, but enough to be unmistakable. Then, through the static, a sound played back. A long, low, guttural moan that built into what could only be described as a man crying. Sean uploaded the clip to YouTube to ask if anyone could explain it. Thousands of viewers commented that they heard different things. Whispers, crying, even someone saying, "Leave me be." But a few pointed something out he hadn't noticed. A shadow on the wall. It didn't belong to anyone in the frame. It moved slowly across the room, toward the camera. That same week, Anna started hearing voices in the shower. Someone calling her name just below the sound of running water. She refused to stay in the house anymore, taking Jacob to her mother's for a few nights. Sean stayed behind, determined to record more evidence. The second night alone, he was woken up by the smoke alarm, blaring at 3 a.m. again. He tore it off the ceiling, pulled out the batteries, but it wouldn't stop. Then, from down the hall came that same sobbing sound. Only now it was louder, closer. Sean grabbed his phone and filmed as he walked toward the guest room. The door was closed. The crying stopped. He opened it slowly, and his phone light hit the painting. But it wasn't hanging anymore. It was on the floor, leaning upright against the bedpost. The face in the painting looked different. The brushstrokes seemed darker, like the paint had run. He left the house that night and didn't return until morning. He took the painting to a local historian who specialized in post-war British art. The man looked uneasy when he saw it. He said there were rumors of an artist from the 1950s who had experimented with ritual painting, mixing his own bodily fluids with pigment as part of a seance-inspired technique. That artist vanished shortly after completing The Anguished Man. Sean didn't believe it, until the historian showed him something else. A newspaper clipping of an unsolved suicide from the same period. The victim was found near an unfinished painting, titled The Anguished Man. Sean returned home, sealed the painting in a trunk, and put it back in the attic where it belonged. But even then, strange things continued. Footsteps, whispers, and always that same weeping sound, especially when it rained. He refuses to destroy it, saying he feels like something or someone is tied to it. In his own words, "I think there's a soul in that canvas, and whatever pain he put in it, it still wants to be heard." To this day, the painting remains locked away. Sean keeps the attic door nailed shut, but sometimes, he says, on quiet nights, he can still hear soft crying above the ceiling. He was outside my window every night, and when I finally called the police, they said there was no one there. It happened in 2019, in a small Ohio suburb about 40 minutes outside Columbus. Madison lived alone for the first time. She was 23, fresh out of college, working as a barista while saving for grad school. Her apartment was tiny but cozy. Ground floor, 1 bedroom, cheap rent. The windows faced a quiet patch of trees that blocked out most of the streetlights. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. For the first few months, nothing strange happened. She worked late shifts, came home after midnight, watched some Netflix, and went to bed. Until one night in October. That night, Madison came home from a late closing shift. It was just after 1 a.m., the air cold enough that her breath fogged. She parked her car, grabbed her bag, and noticed something odd. Her living room light was on. She was sure she'd turned it off before leaving. She unlocked the door slowly, heart pounding. Everything inside looked normal. She told herself she'd probably just forgotten, that she was overworked and exhausted. But later, as she got ready for bed, she heard a sound. A faint tap-tap-tap against her bedroom window. She froze. Her blinds were closed, but she could see a faint outline, like someone shadow-shifting just beyond the glass. She turned off her lamp and waited. Silence. Then the tapping came again. Softer this time. She reached for her phone to call 911, but after a few seconds, it stopped. She told herself it must have been a tree branch. She even opened the blinds a crack to check. There was nothing outside, just the reflection of her own face staring back. The next morning, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. In the dirt just beneath her window were 2 shoe prints. Heavy, deep, like a man's boots. She called her landlord, who promised to have the maintenance guy check the grounds. But when she came home that night, she saw something else. On her doormat, a folded piece of paper. No envelope. No name. Just 3 words scribbled in red ink. "You looked beautiful." Madison showed it to her coworker the next day, who begged her to call the police. She did, but the officer who came seemed indifferent. He said it was probably a prank or a delivery mix-up. Still, he agreed to drive by her apartment for the next few nights. But the visits didn't help, because whoever was out there got smarter. Every few nights, Madison would hear something new. Faint crunching leaves outside, or her motion light flicking on for no reason. Once, she found her bathroom window open an inch, though she hadn't touched it. She started sleeping with a kitchen knife beside her bed. A week later, she was in her living room reading when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. You shouldn't stay up so late. It's bad for your skin. Her hands went cold. She didn't respond, but messages kept coming, each one describing exactly what she was doing. Unknown. You drink a lot of tea. Unknown. That book looks boring. Unknown. Blue pajamas tonight. Nice. She ran to the window and yanked the blinds open. Nothing. The woods were empty. She called the police again. They traced the number but said it was a prepaid burner phone, untraceable. That night, Madison slept in her car in a Walmart parking lot. Days passed. She stayed with her sister for a while, but eventually had to return to her apartment to pack. She'd decided to move. She couldn't handle it anymore. Her sister came with her that afternoon. They filled boxes in silence until Madison went to grab her charger from the bedroom. That's when she saw it. On the windowsill, a small Polaroid photo, curled at the edges. It showed her sleeping in bed. The blinds were half open, and whoever took it had been outside looking in. She dropped the photo and screamed for her sister. They ran out of the apartment and called the police from the parking lot. When officers arrived, they searched the building and the woods behind it. And that's when they found something. A small clearing about 50 feet from her window. There was a sleeping bag, some food wrappers, and a pair of binoculars. But the worst part, there were dozens of Polaroids. All of her. Different days. Different outfits. Some from angles inside the apartment, taken through the cracks in her blinds. The police took everything as evidence and promised to increase patrols. But the man was never caught. They ran DNA from the sleeping bag and prints from the Polaroids. No matches. The phone never pinged again. It was as if he vanished into thin air. Madison moved to another city, changed her number, and deleted every trace of her old life online. But she said something in her submission that still gives me chills. It's been 4 years. I have a new job, a new home, and a new number. But sometimes, when I check my phone at night, there's a notification from an unknown contact. No message. Just a single photo attachment. And when I open it, it's always a picture of me, taken through the window. When you become a parent, sleep becomes a luxury. For my husband and me, our first child, a baby girl named Emily, was born in late 2021. We had just moved into a small 2-story rental house in Portland. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful, surrounded by pine trees, and far from the noise of the city. When Emily was born, we set up a baby monitor. One of those newer Wi-Fi models with night vision and sound detection. It let us check on her through an app, even when we were downstairs. At first, it felt comforting. But that comfort didn't last long. It started one night when Emily was 3 months old. I woke up to the sound of crackling static coming from the monitor. Normally, it only made noise when she moved or cried, but this was different. It was a slow, rhythmic hum, almost like someone was whispering through the mic. I grabbed my phone, opened the monitor app, and froze. The camera showed her crib. Emily was sound asleep, but in the upper right corner of the screen, I saw a shape. It looked like someone was standing in the corner of her room, too tall to be a shadow, too still to be anything human. Then, for a split second, the audio picked up a faint voice. A woman's voice, whispering, "Go back to sleep, my baby." The next morning, I checked the app's playback history. No video. Just a single note in the log, "Connection error, interference detected." I brushed it off as a glitch. But the next night, the same thing happened. Around 2:14 a.m., static again. This time, the whispering was louder. The same woman's voice, soothing, almost maternal. Only this time, Emily started crying hard. I ran upstairs, heart pounding. The room was freezing cold. Much colder than the rest of the house. But what really scared me, the baby monitor camera had been moved, turned toward the window. No one else was home. My husband thought I was overreacting, but I knew what I heard. The next day, I installed a separate motion camera. one not connected to Wi-Fi, just a local SD card. That night, around the same time, 2:14 a.m., the app sent a notification again, sound detected in nursery. I didn't open it this time. I waited. When I checked the footage in the morning, my blood ran cold. For about 15 seconds, the video showed Emily sleeping peacefully. Then, a faint fog-like mist began to drift into frame, slowly forming into the outline of a woman standing beside the crib. You couldn't see her face, only long dark hair and the shape of her arm reaching toward the baby. Emily started to stir, whimpering. And then, the woman bent down and whispered something close to her ear. The audio cracked, and the file cut out. We called the landlord that day. He looked uneasy when I described what we saw. After a long silence, he finally said, "You know, you're not the first family to have weird experiences here." Apparently, 2 years before we moved in, a woman had lived there with her newborn son. She was a single mother. Her name was Lydia Marks. One winter night, there was a power outage during a snowstorm. The furnace broke. By the time anyone found them, she and her baby had both died of carbon monoxide poisoning in that same upstairs room. That's why the rent had been so cheap. That night, I unplugged the baby monitor. I didn't care anymore. But around 2:15 a.m., Emily started crying again, louder than ever. I rushed upstairs, and there she was, standing in her crib. Not crying, but reaching towards something in the corner of the room. The air was freezing and I could see my breath. Then I heard it. The same voice, soft and warm, whispering, "It's okay, Mommy's here." Except, it wasn't my voice. The curtains began to move, even though the window was shut. I grabbed Emily, ran downstairs, and didn't go back up till morning. The next day, I went upstairs to grab our things. The monitor light was flashing, even though it was unplugged. When I checked it, there was a new video clip. It was short, only 5 seconds long. Emily sleeping peacefully, and a faint, blurry figure standing beside the crib. You could just barely hear a whisper before the video cut out. "She's safe now." We moved out a week later. I've since read up on Lydia Marks. Her obituary said she was a devoted mother who would do anything to protect her child. I guess some promises last longer than life itself. Every one of these stories came from real people. Ordinary people who experienced something they still can't explain. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe trauma. Or maybe there are things out there we're not meant to understand. If you've ever lived through something you can't forget, a noise, a shadow, a voice that shouldn't exist, share it in the comments. I read every single one, because your story might be the next one I tell. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true horror stories every night. Sleep well if you can.